In February of 2026, two things happened within days of each other. One royal was arrested, and another royal quietly signed away the only house that was ever truly hers. The whole country watched the arrest. Almost nobody watched the signature, but the signature is the one that lingers in the mind. When you put them side by side, you are not looking at two separate stories. You are looking at a single, massive narrative. It is the story of a reign changing hands and a family very quietly beginning to count. What is moving inside that palace right now is much bigger than any single headline. This is the quiet arithmetic of a new reign, and once the pattern becomes clear, it is impossible to look away. You have probably seen the sensational headlines floating around the internet. There are claims that Prince William dragged Queen Camilla's son to court over Balmoral, or that a sealed final wish was read aloud in a silent room. Other stories claim Meghan Markle was entirely erased from the records by a single stroke of William's pen. Honestly, those videos are everywhere, but almost none of it is true. There was no lawsuit. There was no sealed folder. A search for those court filings reveals they simply do not exist. But underneath all that invented internet drama sits a real story. The real one is colder, quieter, and far more interesting than the fairy tale. To understand what is happening today, you have to go back to the original wound. Every story about this family eventually circles back to one woman, Diana. She was the young woman the whole world fell in love with, the one who walked into her marriage at 20 years old believing in the fairy tale. She famously said years later that there were 3 people in her marriage, and she was not wrong. The nation watched the cold years, the public humiliation, and the television confession in 1994 when Charles admitted his affair to the entire country. Then, in August of 1997, a tunnel in Paris took the rest. She was only 36 years old. 2 young boys woke up that morning without a mother. If you watched the funeral that September, you remember the image that still breaks hearts decades later. A 15-year-old boy walking behind his mother's coffin in front of the entire world, listening to hooves on stone while holding a small white card on the flowers that simply said, "Mommy." Most children are allowed to grieve behind a closed door, but William grieved on live television. He was not allowed to cry, he was not allowed to stop, and he never forgot who he believed had helped take his mother's happiness away. But then the world seemed to turn completely upside down. The woman so many people blamed for Diana's suffering did not fade away. She married Charles in 2005, and in May of 2023 at Westminster Abbey, she was crowned beside him as Queen Camilla. If anyone had predicted that outcome in 1997, people would have laughed in their face. No one outside that family can truly read another person's heart, but the events that followed speak for themselves. This is the real story those fabricated videos are clumsily trying to steal. Imagine a house with a long memory finally doing its sums, because that is exactly where this narrative is heading. What most people miss about William is that he is not loud. He does not feud in public the way his brother does. Instead, he waits. He is patient, methodical, and when he finally moves, he moves like a man who has already calculated every single outcome. In September of 2022, when his grandmother died, William inherited the Duchy of Cornwall, a private estate worth well over £1 billion. Overnight, the heir became the ultimate landlord, and one of the very first things he did with that power tells you everything. For almost 20 years, Camilla's younger sister, Annabel Elliot, had been the head interior designer for those estates. Hired by Charles back in 2005, she was paid year after year to decorate the duchy's holiday cottages and offices. It was good, consistent money, a comfortable arrangement that ran like clockwork for 2 decades. But then William took over the books. The very next annual report showed something that had not appeared in nearly 20 years, a blank space next to her name, with nothing paid to Annabel Elliot. The palace simply stated that her work was considered complete. Considered complete. It is a phrase worth sitting with for a moment. The official line claims there was no bad blood and that her job was simply done, but you have to ask yourself why this specific name was cut the very first season William held the purse strings. The papers called it routine, but it looks much more like the first major subtraction. Once you start watching for it, the pattern does not stop. The sister leaves the payroll, and the door closes so softly you would miss it if you blinked. What gives this subtraction its true weight is Princess Anne, the person with the longest memory in that family. Most people read her as cold, but she is simply the most disciplined person in the entire operation. Anne carries this whole story from closer than anyone else. Long before Diana ever met Camilla, Anne was involved with Andrew Parker Bowles in the early 1970s, before he married Camilla in '73. She lived a version of this story decades before it became Diana's tragedy. When Anne watches the family draw a line between who belongs by blood and who married in, she is not guessing. She has been on every single side of that line. While we cannot know what Anne says behind closed doors, we know what she stands for, and the whole institution knows it too. This is the patient plan of a reign changing hands and beginning to count. But the people being counted do not just sit there, and that is where the story gets genuinely interesting. Camilla is nobody's fool. She spent nearly 30 years rebuilding her image brick by patient brick through quiet charity work and careful interviews. By the coronation, a real share of the public had come around to her. In 2025, you could still see the human being underneath when she talked about her garden at the Sandringham Flower Show, calling it the best therapy in the world. That garden belongs to Raymil House, the one ordinary thing she has tried to hold on to. Camilla bought it in 1996 for £850,000 with her own money, right after her divorce and before the crown. It is the one place that was entirely hers, not a royal residence allocated by the palace. In February of 2026, she moved it. Quietly, she signed the house over into a trust structure, holding the legal title for her 2 children. She did this during the exact same weeks the whole country was watching her former brother-in-law get arrested. Sources close to her insisted it was just formalizing a family arrangement, but you have to ask yourself why she chose that exact moment to do it. There are a few ways to read this, and each explanation feels colder than the last. Maybe it is simple estate planning, or maybe you do not pull the one thing that is truly yours out of reach when you believe you are going to win. You do that when you have already calculated the mathematics of losing. The timing points one way, and a nearby detail makes it sharper still. Around the same period, Charles quietly bought the old mill house right next door using £3 million of his own private money. He did it to stop the property from being turned into a commercial wedding venue or a holiday rental on their private lane. This family will spend £3 million just to keep one royal lane from becoming a business, a fact that becomes highly relevant when you look at what happened next. Meanwhile, far away in California, the other outsider went very quiet. Harry, Diana's lost son, is facing his own calculations. In March of 2026, an investigative book reported that Harry now fears the future King William could remove the Sussex titles entirely, even extending that removal to his children. Harry's representatives rejected the report hard, calling the author fixated, but the denial cannot hide the underlying anxiety. The outsider across the ocean is doing the same mathematics as everyone else, wondering when the counting will finally reach him. Everyone is quietly bracing for a reckoning, and that reckoning has a name: Andrew. The fairy tale videos online get this part completely backward by inventing punishments, when the real story sitting right in front of them is staggered enough. Andrew was born to the blood, the Queen's son, and second in line to the throne for the first 22 years of his life. If anyone in that institution was considered untouchable, it was him. Yet, look at what the family did anyway. In October of 25, he gave up his titles, and days later Charles stripped the rest, leaving him as just Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. He lost the name, then he lost the house, forced to surrender his lease on Royal Lodge in Windsor. Then, in February of 2026, on his 66th birthday, he was arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office, becoming the first senior British royal arrested in nearly 400 years. His own brother, the king, did not lift a finger to shield him. Charles stated clearly that the law must take its course. That is not a fairy tale. It actually happened, and it is colder than anything the internet could invent. The detail that ties the whole thing together emerged this June, when it was reported that Andrew had been making money by subletting cottages on his rent-free estate. The real scandal about commercializing a royal home belonged to Andrew, who was quietly renting out the grounds he was living on for free. Remember what Charles did for Camilla's private lane? He paid millions to stop a house from becoming a business. The contrast tells the whole story: protect the home that is loved, but let the one who turned it into a business fall all the way down. When you look back at all of it together, the sister off the payroll, the house moved into a trust, the titles subtracted, and the arrest, you have to ask who is actually driving this process. The unsettling answer is that maybe nobody has to. The online videos fail to see this because they are too busy inventing a villain. There is no secret midnight order. The reckoning is not an act, it is a fundamental rule of the institution. A consort's standing belongs entirely to the reign, not to the person, and what the crown lends, the crown eventually calls back. Nobody in the palace has to actively move against Camilla's family because the structure does it automatically. A reign ends, and what was borrowed against it ends too. Andrew proved that in this family, even those born to the blood can be subtracted. So, what chance does someone who was merely invited in really have? That is the quiet arithmetic running under every headline. To be absolutely fair, nobody has thrown Camilla out of anything. She is the queen, possessing real protection, standing, and public affection. She built that position herself and holds the title today. But history suggests that what is borrowed eventually gets called back, and the day that arithmetic reaches its conclusion is not a question of if, but when. In the end, this was never about loud revenge. Revenge is noisy, but this process has been entirely silent. There was no open war. There was only a family slowly remembering the difference between who belongs to it by blood and who it once invited in. Every quiet subtraction tilts the balance back toward the boy who walked behind that coffin, and toward the mother he was walking behind. She lost everything in a Paris tunnel, but her son inherited the kingdom. One by one, the people on the other side of that old wound are being counted out by a rule older than any of them, proving that the long argument is being won quietly, without saying a single word.